Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Pilot Lawyer Podcast. Thank you for your attention while this important legal information is reviewed. What you hear should not replace consultation with an attorney and should not be considered advice for your situation. On behalf of the Pilot Lawyer and your entire crew, it's our pleasure to have you aboard.
Welcome, aviators, to the Pilot Lawyer Podcast with us, the Ison Brothers at the Ison Law Firm, where aviation law is all we do, nothing else. You're here for what we do best, navigating the FAA medical certification process for pilots and those who want to become pilots. And as we say around the office, if you don't laugh, you cry. And for the next 30 minutes, we hope to bring you the lighter side of what can otherwise be a very frustrating process. So whether you are laughing at us or with us, join us brothers as we discuss the fascinating world of FAA medical certification. Listener, it's been a few days, weeks since we've had a podcast episode come out, and that's because we've been very busy, and Christopher's been out of the office doing daddy things. Not that come hither daddy type of thing, but he's got a new dad. No, he didn't have a new daddy. He is a new daddy. He is a new daddy.
Our daddy would be shocked to learn I have a new daddy.
Correct. But you're a brand new daddy for the fourth time.
That's correct.
Quite the litter.
Yep.
And just, this is number 4. Tell us, what's it like?
Busy.
Busy. Yep. Very busy. Well, blessings. Alex has been at the office just because he's a lazy so-and-so.
Yes, he is.
No, he's not. He's very hard worker. Other good
Hardly
news.
working.
Working at it.
Working at hardly work.
So other good news is that we've recently signed a publishing deal to author a book on FAA medical certification through ASA.
Shocking.
So that's something you can look forward to reading as well as listening to us in the coming months, and we'll keep you posted on that. So,
I was trying to push for a authorship of a travel guide, The Snobby Slob.
Yeah, well, that's my other persona, Snobby Slob. But you can call our office and congratulate us on all of this stuff whenever you'd like.
So flippant.
So that being said, today what we're talking about is not connected with a blog article yet. But we're going a little off script.
Oh, boy.
And that I thought a good topic would be, when do I need a HIMS AME?
If you got a pulse and a breath, you need a HIMS AME.
As some would say it. Boy, you need to get in here. I'm a HIMS AME. You can't do a simple asthma case without HIMS AME. That's being facetious. But there's a thought process out there in practice amongst, I think, the HIMS AME. So you got to have a HIMS AME for anything coming and going.
What is a HIMS AME? What does HIMS stand for?
HIMS, you tell us.
Human Intervention Motivation Studies, HIMS.
Yeah, and so not every AME is a HIMS AME.
So if I go to the 2-week course or the week-long course that the FAA puts on for aviation medical examiners, or to become an aviation medical examiner designee, I don't automatically become a HIMS AME.
You're not even a senior AME at that point.
Whoa.
Ooh. So if I need, for whatever the situation may be in my life, a HIMS AME,
You can't just go to
I
any
can't just
Joe
go
Blow.
to any random AME around the corner. I'm going to have to find somebody.
And there's a very limited number of HIMS AMEs throughout the country and the world. And there is a published list that the FAA publishes identifying who's currently on the list, who's currently wanting HIMS-related cases, who's currently enrolled in the training.
Do you have to go to a HIMS AME local to you, or do you have choice of who you engage as a HIMS AME?
You could go to whoever you want throughout the country. The FAA doesn't limit that. But once you've engaged with a HIMS AME, let's say that your special issuance is dependent upon your continued engagement with said HIMS AME, which we can discuss, you'll have to stay with that HIMS AME until such time that the FAA approves a change. Now, they're not going to approve a change just because you don't like the person anymore, per se, but it's going to be more of a situation where there has to be some level of concern with geographical frustration. It's hard to get to this HIMS AME.
Well, why'd you choose someone halfway across the country, sir?
Well, because I just don't know.
So how do you change HIMS AMEs? Like, let's say you need to change. You just send that request in a little scrap of paper, or do you have to?
There's a few scrap of papers that need to be put together.
Is it complicated?
It's a little complicated. You have to have your airman medical file be released to your new HIMS AME of choice. And then that HIMS AME has to agree in writing to become your new HIMS AME. And your old HIMS AME has to agree to release you to the new HIMS AME. And then that documentation together needs to be produced to the FAA. Then the FAA has to approve the change. But again, this is only in cases where you have a special issuance.
Might I add some kind of words of practical wisdom here?
Let's see if you can.
If you have a problem with your current HIMS AME, it may not behoove you to aggravate that relationship too much at the outset, because if you change HIMS AMEs, that's going to be a loss of income to your current HIMS AME, right?
Sure.
So you may not necessarily want to have someone all hot and flustered and bothered because you've had a falling out or something, whatever the case may be, right? Is this making sense? Is this tracking? So that way they're more maybe willing to release you.
I see. So if you say, hey, I don't like Dr. X, I want to change. You don't want to go in there foaming at the mouth saying, hey, I got to get out of here because you're a piece of work.
Yeah.
Instead, you want to say, hey, here's a reason why I need to change. And the reason
I can't make the flight to Fort Lauderdale every 6 months.
I think this is something that if you've gotten to us and you're needing help with it, it's probably too late. The act of diplomacy has probably gone out the window.
Perhaps.
But if you can help yourself,
yeah, try to be cordial.
Try to be cordial.
It's not because you got to get everybody's approval. And if let's say you got new HIMS AME lined up, and old HIMS AME calls up new HIMS AME and says, "Oh, Airman
is a piece of work.
This guy's a jerk. You don't want to work with him. It's just going to make the process. So just try to be calm. That's always a good thing in this process. But it's a frustrating process, like we say in the opening. So we're not blind to the fact that it's tough to get things the way you want them. But nevertheless, I guess the question bouncing way back is, when do I need a HIMS AME? Now, out there on the interweb, there's a thought process, you got to get with a HIMS AME to do anything that's difficult with the FAA. Well, unpopular opinion is that that's not correct. Really, you don't need a HIMS AME with the exception of some limited circumstances. Now,
I got a DUI last night. This is all theoretical. I did not get a DUI last night, but I got a DUI last night. Do I need to go get a HIMS AME?
Not necessarily. Perhaps, but not necessarily. But a DUI is one area where you may end up needing a HIMS AME. Let me tell you all about it. Reason being is that ultimately, if you meet criteria for substance abuse or substance dependence, you're going to have to engage in some version of HIMS-related monitoring, and that has to be done through a HIMS AME. It can't be done through just any Joe Blow AME.
I think it should be not to just cut you off, but I think it should be important to note that there are multiple professions of HIMS.
Sure.
Right? Like there's HIMS AMEs, there's HIMS psychiatrists, there's HIMS neuropsychologists.
Yeah, that's right. But a HIMS AME is really what we're talking about here. And do I need the HIMS AME's involvement? Well, you don't really need a HIMS AME's involvement in a DUI unless that DUI triggers that substance abuse or substance dependence concern. Now, it may be helpful to have a HIMS AME in a DUI-related matter, usher you through the thought process with the FAA up front, but some HIMS AMEs, I think, misread the situation and will send someone who's got a BAC of under 0.15, for example, into monitoring when maybe they don't need it. Or you'll have someone who falls in the substance abuse realm. Maybe all they need is monitoring and psychiatric evaluation that don't fully understand the distinction between abuse and dependence. And they just know enough to say, you got to go to treatment, you got to go to rehab and all this stuff, where that may not be appropriate for your particular situation. And, I'm certainly not disparaging the HIMS AMEs, but there are some that just don't do it enough, in my opinion, to really understand that distinction between abuse and dependence. They know enough to think, hey, we'll send them to treatment or whatever. And sure, they're going to have their discretion. If they feel like, there's no way I'm going to get behind this person unless I see X, Y, and Z. I'm not talking about their discretion in that capacity. I'm talking about they just don't understand what the FAA is looking for enough between
the regulatory requirements in relation to the policies.
They know just like you. They know just enough to be dangerous.
That's absolutely correct.
So that being said, with your DUI situation, typically in a case like that,
I guess you could probably say though, they could be looking at it from a standpoint of what's the most likely scenario I can put this person through for them to get a medical. Well, if I just send them through the full-blown HIMS program and they go through all the rehab and this, that, and the other stuff,
sure,
they're going to get a medical, and so then they got their medical, and I've helped them get it.
Yeah, sure.
But maybe they took the longest, most difficult route.
Yeah, but I'm 100% over what the budget should otherwise be for this case. I'm 2 times more involved in treatment and aftercare and so on than I should otherwise be for the rest of my life for some cases. So now
you're engaged with the HIMS AME, right?
Yeah, so there I'm stuck with that HIMS AME.
So, again, it might be some financial incentive for the HIMS AME to say, go to the...
Yeah.
We're just looking at...
Hypothesis. Ultimately, though, the thought process with a DUI is that sometimes it might make sense to produce documentation to the FAA first and see what they say. Now, there are some cases where that if your BAC falls within the realm of abuse, that you're going to need to start some monitoring. So getting with a HIMS AME early on makes sense. Or, hey, your BAC is so high, you're going to fall into the dependence realm. You need to go ahead and start doing it, get with a HIMS AME before the FAA tells you. But just rushing to a HIMS AME may not always be the answer. For example, we've seen cases where regular AMEs say, oh, well, you've got ADHD. This is a HIMS case. You need to see a HIMS AME. Or you've got depression. Well, this is a HIMS case. You need to see a HIMS AME. Well, not necessarily. There are very few situations in which the FAA, by matter of policy and guidelines, will require a HIMS AME. And typically, that's in cases where there's been either some level of substance abuse or dependence and there's a requirement for monitoring, or in an SSRI-related case where the individual is taking an SSRI medication and they're engaged in the SSRI special issuance pathway, where essentially there's a requirement for ongoing check-ins with the HIMS AME. Some levels of HIV-related cases require HIMS AME as well. So is it a situation where I need a HIMS AME just to do a straight ADHD case, or I need some, I have asthma, or I have a complicated case. I've got diabetes. Looking at me, I wouldn't be too surprised if that was the case. But I've got diabetes mixed with asthma, mixed with traumatic brain injury. Is a complicated case.
That's why that one eye keeps going to the left.
Yeah. So, do I need a HIMS AME for those situations?
No.
So, there are cases, though, we've had where the FAA sort of gets creative and says, well, maybe following with a HIMS AME would be a good idea. So that's in situations where maybe the individual has a history of some sort of depressive symptoms or depressive history, and the FAA says, well, we don't necessarily need you to go on an SSRI to mitigate ongoing risk to aviation safety, but we want to get creative, and we think maybe if we had you followed by someone with aviation know-how for every 6 months, that would be good. So they say, we'll meet with a HIMS AME every 6 months. But that's not something that's by a matter of their typical guidelines. That's something they're going to do just on their own if they feel like that's necessary.
Has your FAA medical certificate been denied? Are you concerned you may not be able to get a medical certificate from the FAA? Are you at risk for FAA action for failing to report your medical history appropriately? Call the pilot lawyer at 1-855-FAA-1215 to discuss your options for getting the FAA to issue your medical certificate and get you flying. We are happy to evaluate your case and discuss with you a plan for presenting your case to the AME or the FAA. Aviation law is all we do, nothing else.
So what you're saying is that there are circumstances that based on the fact pattern, the policy is you will have to engage with a HIMS AME.
Correct.
And then there are times when the circumstances would not, on their face, require you to engage with a HIMS AME. However, the FAA and their special issuance process says, now we'll need you to engage with the HIMS AME.
That's correct.
So in those situations,
it's hard to say.
You wouldn't want to just necessarily run right out and get engaged with the HIMS AME because it's possible that might not ever become a requirement.
That's correct. But there are misconceptions just afoot.
A misconception.
There are misconceptions afoot that, I've got a difficult case. I have to see a HIMS AME because they're going to be the only ones that can sort this out, which is not the case.
Only us.
We're the only ones that can sort it.
Only we can sort it out.
Only we can sort it out. That's
Once
correct.
we get ourselves sorted out.
Now, let me say this much. Let me say this much. We've seen cases where along this thought process that, I'm going to go consult with this HIMS AME. And this HIMS AME is going to tell me, it's going to stay between us. We've had cases where that is not the case. Instead, what happens is the HIMS AME turns around and calls the FAA and says, hey, did you know that this airman has X, Y, and Z condition? They do a hotline complaint. Or worse yet, they go directly to the doctors at the FAA and say, hey, you better look at this one. So I know
you don't have doctor-patient confidentiality with a HIMS AME.
That's right.
Whereas and not to toot our own horn, but if you came to us, told us what the problems are, you have attorney-client privilege.
That's right.
So, we're ethically obligated to keep it between us, right? But we can't go out. I mean, truthfully, why would we? I mean, we don't care enough to want to go out there and sandbag somebody. But beyond that, though, I mean, there's a misconception that, if I tell the HIMS AME,
it's going to stay between.
It's going to stay between.
No, there are some AMEs that are willing to have a consult with you and keep that between you. I mean,
you're not saying that this is every situation with it, AME or HIMS AME, but we have seen it happen many times,
and it is not good, and it's just a real misconception. So that is a problem that with this idea of I need to go see a HIMS AME and so on and so forth. It just doesn't get you anywhere. I mean, because if you remember that HIMS AMEs are there for the FAA. They're not there for the airmen. And that's something that's very clearly stated, in times where we've been involved in litigation with substance-related cases and so on and so forth.
Yeah, you're not in a doctor-patient relationship.
Right. They're not there to advocate for you.
Or treat you.
Or a third party.
That's right. They're there to monitor you and report to the FAA if there's some concern, which is fine. But the misconception is, they're here to help me. And that's maybe what they say to your face because they're sitting there in the room with you. But it's not in reality always the case. Alex, you've been in practice. Is it ever difficult to tell a patient the truth?
No.
Well,
you ever told a lie? Have we discussed this on here?
No.
Anthony and I were preparing for a trial once, and we were trying to come up with questions for cross-examination of one of the witnesses. And we thought the best question you could ever ask a witness would be, have you ever told a lie? Because they have, right? And so if they say, yes, I've told a lie, now they're admitted liar. If they say no, they're lying on the stand, so they're a liar. Obviously, you can't ask those questions, but...
You ever told a lie, there it is. So that being said, there's also a difference between HIMS psychiatrists and HIMS psychologists and neuropsychologists, like you said. Now, there may be a time where proactively seeing a HIMS psychiatrist makes more sense than seeing a regular clinical psychiatrist. In our opinion, in our experience, it's made sense to just see a HIMS psychiatrist in cases where the FAA may want a psychiatric evaluation.
Anxiety, depression, PTSD, substance abuse, dependence.
Right. And the reason being is that our experience has been that if you go and see it as a regular treating psychiatrist, in many cases, they don't understand and fully appreciate the aeromedical significance of certain conditions, and they don't couch it in a situation relative to risk to aviation safety.
The regulatory parlance.
Correct. They don't understand the milieu. So in the FAA, you wait 3 months, 4 months, you send in a psychiatric evaluation, they come back and say, well, that's not good enough, Sean. Well, you need to see a HIMS psychiatrist. But there are definitely times, essentially, where submitting a HIMS psychiatric evaluation will help move things forward through the FAA in the capacity that instead of them coming back and saying this clinical psychiatric evaluation is no bueno, instead they have what they could possibly want vis-a-vis a HIMS psychiatric evaluation. Now, sure.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yep, here we go. So in that HIMS psychiatric evaluation, if one of the recommendations is to follow up with a HIMS AME every 6 months, say that's the recommendation from the psychiatrist, how much do we have to hold to that? I mean, is that...
It depends on the case. So like if the HIMS psychiatrist recommends that, doesn't necessarily mean the FAA is going to go along with it. But sometimes if the HIMS psychiatrist thinks that's important, you're trying to take those recommendations to make an argument that this airman doesn't need to be denied, but in lieu of denial, they could do X, Y, and Z, such as meeting with a HIMS AME to mitigate that risk to aviation safety that there could be perceived by the FAA. Now,
would you also maybe go ahead and do that just to help maybe streamline the process?
Sometimes. It just depends on what the case is. Now, with HIMS neuropsychologists, though, so again, there are cases like ADHD and so on where you're going to need to see a HIMS-trained neuropsychologist. That doesn't mean you're in the HIMS program. You just need to see this neuropsychologist, that can do the type of testing that the FAA wants to see.
Maybe that's where some of the confusion is. There's a difference between seeing a HIMS-trained professional and being in the HIMS program.
That's right.
Whereas the HIMS program is generally just going to be for what? Substance abuse, really just substance dependence, right?
Substance dependence.
Maybe the SSRI pathway.
Yeah. There are HIMS protocols for substance abuse, right? We're going to do monitoring with the HIMS AME, see a HIMS psychiatrist, maybe some AA meetings, which is part of the quote-unquote HIMS program, which really the HIMS program for substance dependence is just engagement in treatment and aftercare recovery activities that are sort of broadly deemed to be the HIMS program.
So let's say you're a captain
of industry?
Of industry, no. Let's say you're with an airline. This might be for the folks that have a career invested in this more so than the weekend warrior. But let's say you have some type of incident in your personal life that comes to light, and your employer knows about it. FAA doesn't know about it because there hasn't been a triggering mechanism yet to report it, right? Like you haven't applied for a new medical yet, or some other event hasn't occurred which would have required you to tell the FAA, right? So as far as the FAA is concerned, you still got your medical and everything's legit there. But your employer knows, and your employer says, hey, you got to go to the HIMS program. Now, it might get a little dicey because you got employment law involved in this question too, right? And we don't handle employment law. But should you just immediately run off to get in the HIMS program in those situations?
It's going to depend on what your company requires and so on and so forth. So consult an employment attorney in that case. But in addition to that, though, what can happen in those situations is that you rush into a treatment facility because your employment requirements demand it. And therein, there's enough documentation generated to suggest that you meet criteria for substance dependence because maybe you're forced to say things that aren't true and so on and so forth just to get into the program. Then you're stuck into the HIMS program or have an engagement with the HIMS AME and so on and so forth. Whereas sometimes it might make sense, and kind of the overarching thought process of this episode is that maybe it makes sense to interface with the FAA more directly first to see really what they want in some of these more nuanced cases before you go to a HIMS AME and force the HIMS AME to start doing monitoring and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. There's nothing that says that you can't be proactive in bringing these things to the FAA's attention,
right?
In anticipation of your next upcoming medical and whether or not you can maybe get a decision made on it before it even becomes an issue, right?
Now, there's some times where the HIMS AME just might know a little more about it than a local AME. Sure. But there's also the misperception that, HIMS AME is going to know more people inside at the FAA and blah, 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 blah. It's going to make things move forward. They're going to call Dr. Jones and or Dr. Bill or Dr. Smith or whatever and say, hey, X, Y, and Z. And the next thing you know, I have my medical next day.
Who's Dr. Jones Bill Smith?
Well, he's an interesting character.
Cousin to John Jingle.
Dr. Bill Loney. There's some other X-rated versions I could give you as well, but call me local and I'll discuss that with you. But nevertheless, it's just not the case. It's not like, I've got a HIMS AME involved in my case. This is going to go lightning speed. Get out of here. That's not going to happen. So unless you really have a situation that requires a HIMS AME, or if maybe your AME just happens to be a HIMS AME, you don't always have to seek out a HIMS AME for non-HIMS AME related cases. For example, ADHD. That's not a situation where, I can't help you with this. Regular AME saying that. This is a HIMS case. You're going to have to see a HIMS AME. Or something like depression that you're not being followed on SSRI. So just be careful of that because, again, the HIMS AME, like us, we make money off of the process, unfortunately, however you want to look at it, but HIMS AMEs definitely do as well. So, with a service, for example, that's going to be something that's, maybe limited in time, whereas a HIMS AME could get you involved in monitoring for
the rest of your life as long as you hold a medical.
Yeah. So it can really get expensive. And once you're there, sometimes once you've gone to a HIMS AME and started monitoring and that cat's out of the bag to the FAA, you're in a spot where you can't undo what you're putting into the FAA's hands. Garbage in, garbage out. It's not to say you should be throttling things. You need to tell them about the things that are required to tell them about. But engaging with a HIMS AME when maybe you don't need it and you're generating data
where the protocol wouldn't require it.
Right. You're setting yourself up for engagement in things that may be beyond what you would otherwise
So what you're trying to
require.
say is once you touch down there, there's no go around?
Well, coming on here and talking about touching down there. We're not talking about touching down there anymore.
Don't try to use the aviation lingo that you don't know.
It's not cool. It's just not cool.
Yeah, it was.
You're not certificated. You're not certificated, and you don't know what you're talking about.
Certificated. Well, I think we've embarrassed ourselves enough on this one.
I did a good job.
Yeah. So we've pretty much flogged it. You got any parting thoughts or?
Not really.
Yeah. Well,
I think you
call
get it.
us.
Call us first. That really should be what the whole point of this podcast
That's our
is.
new
Call
motto.
us first.
That's our new motto.
Talk to our lovely assistant secretary, Jenna. She'll get you
one
in
guy
touch.
call her Pam.
Okay.
She goes by Pam as well.
Well, you get called something other than Anthony quite frequently.
Andrew. If I don't get called Andrew at least once a week, something's wrong.
You've had clients that you have represented for like a couple years, right? And they still call you Andrew.
At the end of it, Andrew, you did a great job.
I think one person even left a review.
Yeah, for Andrew.
For Andrew. Yeah, we should go hire him.
Andrew knows what he's doing.
Good review.
All right. Well, you've logged another uneventful half hour listening to the Pilot Lawyer podcast. And even though our books probably sit dusty on the shelves.
What is that?
We got the book deal.
Oh, that book.
The suggestion is that no one will buy it.
Bringing it back to the book.
Yeah. But
or you should say, even though our forthcoming book on medical certification will probably say
it's already collecting dust,
flying off the shelves.
Now there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
We are the Ison Brothers of the Ison Law Firm. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.